First to the contentious Medevac laws, which the government hopes to repeal before the end of the year. These were the laws, you may recall, passed against the government's wishes before the election when it was in minority. Now its effort to repeal these laws hinges on Independent Senator Jackie Lambie. She will have the deciding vote on this and is yet to declare a position. Last week we saw a Senate inquiry into this report, but with dissenting reports that from the government senators said, yep, get rid of the Medevac laws. From Labor and the Greens said, no, they are worth keeping in place. Last night in Senate estimates, we heard an update from the head of Operation Sovereign Borders on how these laws are working, just how many asylum seekers from Manus Island and Nauru have now been transferred to Australia under the Medevac laws, and how many have actually required hospitalisation here in Australia.
How many people have been transferred to Australia?
135 people have been transferred. There have been 6 people approved who have been transferred to Australia, and 2 people who have been approved still awaiting transfer to Australia who have adverse security or character holdings.
How many of those individuals transferred for medical reasons would currently be in, say, a hospital or a medical facility?
Well, currently, as of today, as of this morning, there are 0 of those transferred in hospital. Over the course of the bill being enacted, there have been 13 people hospitalised, 9 of which for periods of less than 7 days and 4 of which for periods greater than 7 days.
If they receive no further treatment, they cannot be sent back, is that correct?
Well, under the Act, there is no explicit return mechanism.
So, as you heard there, the update on the numbers from the head of Operation Sovereign Borders, 135 people have now been transferred under the Medevac laws since they came into place. Only 13 of those 135 required any hospitalisation. None, it's understood, are currently in hospital. So that works out at a rate of about 10% who required hospitalisation upon transfer for medical reasons, as recommended under the Medevac laws by doctors independently, and then if challenged by a panel of medical professionals as well. We also heard that while 135 people have come on the Medevac laws, a total of 1,117 have been transferred to Australia over the years under Medevac, but also the pre-existing medical transfer arrangements. So that is a significant number. I'll be talking to the Minister for Home Affairs, Peter Dutton, in just a moment about this and what their fate now is as well. We'll also look at the situation in northern Syria in relation to the Australian citizens, particularly those women and children who are at that Al-Hol refugee camp in northern Syria. Certainly all signs from the Morrison government have been that they are not inclined to go to put any Australian lives in danger to mount any sort of rescue mission for those Australians. The news poll results you might have seen today show there's very little sympathy amongst the Australian population for lives to be put in danger to rescue them either. Certainly the men who've gone as foreign fighters who remain in Kurdish-run prisons there, well, there's not going to be much of a move to rescue them, but the focus for Australia and other European countries has been for particularly the children. It has been a conundrum, as all governments have agreed. Well, the Minister, Peter Dutton, is with me now. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks, David.
Appreciate your time. Can we come back to this Medevac story? So we heard last night that 135 people have come to Australia under the Medevac laws. Only 13 required hospitalisation. What does that tell you?
Well, it says to me very clearly that all of the warnings we put out when this bill was proposed, it's a con. We were already bringing people for medical attention. We were already sending people to the international hospital in Papua New Guinea. We'd already spent millions of dollars providing medical services on Nauru, and this was only ever about bringing people from Manus and Nauru, not for medical attention, but because that was the backdoor way to bring people to Australia, and that's exactly what Anthony Albanese is now standing in the way of us abolishing that law. He's allowing people to come into our country who are of bad character. And Mr.
I want to come to that
to explain why.
This hospitalisation rate, I suppose, is that what you're saying shows this whole thing's a con?
Well, I think if you look at the fact that we were already providing medical services, David, and millions of dollars of taxpayers' money used to provide that service. When you look at, we had warned the Labor Party and the Greens about this bill, that it confers a right on people of bad character to come here against the wishes of the government or the minister of the day, they are bad outcomes. And
but are you suggesting these 135 people who've come aren't really sick?
Well, people have either refused medical attention, people have not gone to a hospital at all. We don't have anyone in hospital at the moment, so you can draw your own conclusions in terms of the level of acuity as to if you're desperate enough to come to Australia, to be flown to Australia for medical attention, but you don't need to go to hospital. Well, I think people can read between the lines.
Just on that, I mean, there are some 982 who've been medically transferred, not under Medevac, but under the existing arrangement. How many of them have required hospitalisation?
Well, there will be a number, but again, a number of people have gamed the system in
but would it be a higher rate than the 10% under
Well, look,
Medevac?
it may or may not be, but the point is that the big difference between the two is that once you get medical attention under our scheme, you can go back. Under Labor's Medevac bill, once people come here, regardless of whether they've come here with bad character or not, once the medical assistance has been rendered to them, they don't go back.
But have any gone back under the pre-existing arrangement?
Well, some have left our country and gone back to their country of origin.
Not to Manus or Nauru?
No, and we've been clear about the difficulties that we face here in the courts. Once people get on, let me make this point. Once people get into Australia and into the legal system here, the migration law is a very, very contested area. There's judicial activism. There are all sorts of lawyers who are out there providing pro bono work, and it is very difficult. We're injuncted at the drop of a hat, and it is very difficult, which is why we're better to treat people offshore. It was the whole idea behind offshore processing introduced by Mr Rudd on Manus and Nauru.
OK, just to clear this up though, you say the Medevac laws have proved to be a con because only 10% of those who've been transferred required hospitalisation, but under the pre-existing arrangements, I think you said there may or may not have been.
No, so the point I make is not only is it a con that people are coming here and not receiving medical attention, the most dangerous con, in my view, is that people can't go back. And you're being forced to take people of bad character who, if they commit a crime whilst they're here, I can't deport them. If they commit a serious crime of sexual assault or rape whilst they're here, I can't deport them back. And that's the law that Labor's provided.
OK, well, just on the medical front though, do you accept some doctors have felt being on Manus Island has been a mental health issue?
Yes, of course.
That's why
and they've been very open about that.
And do you accept that for some, that's...
I think for some people there is a legitimacy to their medical need, and we've provided that medical need. But the Medevac law was never about medical need. It was always about bringing people here through a back door, and that's what they've done. Now, we've had a very strong position in relation to the work that we've done in Sri Lanka to try and disrupt boats up there. We've turned boats around. People hopped on boats, remember, coming thinking that Bill Shorten was going to be elected, and we've been fortunate through, I think, the government's prudent actions that we haven't seen more boat arrivals, because it's a pretty easy thing to market up in Sri Lanka or Vietnam. That look, you can say that you've got a medical condition, you come to Australia and you'll be here.
Have we?
Well, I think, as I say, we've been fortunate because I've been up to Sri Lanka. The General in charge of Operation Sovereign Borders has been up a couple of times. We have really stepped up our work in Sri Lanka because that's the biggest threat for us at the moment.
OK, so just on why it's proven to be a con though, it's not so much because of the hospitalisation rate, because that may or may not be different to the hospitalisation rate for those who've already been transferred. It's because you can't send them back.
No, it's not any one of those is the point that I'm making. I mean, yes, it's a con in terms of some of the people who are claiming a medical condition I don't believe that they've got.
But that was happening anyway.
In some cases it may have been, it certainly was happening. It's a con because we're forced to take people of bad character.
OK, and how many have come, how many have you been forced to take a bad character?
There are 6 that we can identify and 2 more that are in the system.
And what's the bad character?
Well, people that have, for example, as I think we discussed last time, one person who's alleged to have fought or to have been a part of the Iranian army, somebody that's been involved in a prostitution ring, people that are alleged to have been involved in criminal syndicates, drug distribution, etc.
And where are they now?
Well, they're here in Australia.
Are they in detention?
No, they're not.
You can detain them though, can't you?
Well, in some cases you can. And
why can't you with these 6 of bad character?
Well, again, we make judgments on the individuals. and some of them may well be in detention. I can't tell you.
But explain that to me. If you're talking about people of bad character you're worried about, surely you'd detain them.
Well, again, it depends on whether or not they've got a medical condition. In some of the cases...
Under the law, though, they don't need to have a medical...
No, but
you can detain them.
No, but the medical advice in some cases will be that if an individual is here for mental health issues, even if they're of bad character, their advice may be not to have them in an immigration detention centre, but to
you can't ignore that and just detain them?
Well, in some cases you can, but look, I don't make decisions about those issues.
Who does?
Minister Coleman does.
Oh, okay.
Because he's the immigration minister.
So he's deciding whether
he would decide it on advice from the doctors, from the department, from the decision makers within the department.
As far as you're aware, are any of them detained?
But I don't know is the true answer to it. There are thousands of cases, and I just don't have that in front of me.
Can I just check that the 632 refugees we found out have now gone to the US? I think it's 562 that are still on Manus and Nauru. Do you reckon any more will be transferred to the US, or have they now taken all that they want?
I think we will get somewhere in the order of 250 more. I think will go to the US.
So about half of those who are still there?
Yes. Okay. So on Manus Island, we're now down to 4 people, and I think this is incredibly important to point out. So we've moved people off. There are still a handful of people there who are in relationships with local women who have got small businesses. They don't want to go, so that's a decision for them. But we're down to 4 otherwise, and people are living and starting a new life in Port Moresby or elsewhere in PNG. So the fact that we have now cleared the decks essentially on Manus Island, I think is a significant achievement, and we're down to less than 300 on Nauru. And again, I want to get that to zero as quickly as possible as well.
We also learned Senate estimates that it's cost about $27 million to reopen the Christmas Island Detention Centre. As far as we're aware, there's only the one family there. Has that been worth it?
Yes, it has, because this is part of the deterrent element that we had for when the Medevac bill became a law. So
without that, you reckon we would have had?
Well, I think it was reported at the time, and I think it was accurate that this was a significant deterrent, because people who thought that they could just come here from Manus or Nauru and that they would end up in Australia, or they could hop on a boat and come, we've been very clear that those people are not coming to Australia. So yes, cleaning up Labor's mess of border protection costs money. There's no question about that, and it will take us some years yet to get through the backlog of cases and the complexity of each individual case before we finally clean up Labor's mess.
Can I ask you on this plane arrivals issue? We know Christina Kennelly's been pushing hard on this. Mike Bozzullo, the Department Secretary, told estimates last night there is no crisis, in his view, when it comes to plane arrivals. There has been an increase, though, over the last 5 years or so. 90% of them aren't found to be refugees, yet they can stay for usually 4 or more years and work in Australia. Is it a problem?
No, and it's
not a problem?
It's a problem of Christina Kennelly's desire to be heard. It's part of her vanity project. It's part of her need to be relevant and say stupid things. It's part of her desire to, at some stage, I think, have a tilt at the Labor leadership. I think she's on her way to the lower house. I think this is all part of an orchestrated campaign from somebody who's desperate to talk about anything but the Labor Party's failings. I think she's dragging the Labor Party to the left on border protection.
Okay, what about the numbers
the base of the Labor Party?
We have seen...
go on.
I can't get what your point you're making. We have seen an increase, though, in the number of people launching asylum claims.
As the Secretary pointed out yesterday, over, I think it was a 4-year period, where you've got millions of people coming through tourist visas, short-term work stays, etc., you are going to have a number of people who claim protection
and that's
or
been
overstay.
Increasing. Are they gaming the system?
Well, look, some people will be, but they're in a very small number of cases, and there are some.
What's small? How many?
There are some people, for example, who will come here from Malaysia, let's say, or Indonesia, wherever it might be, and they will work. They'll work hard. They'll remit money back, which by the time it goes back is a king's ransom when it goes back to their village.
But are we talking people who don't have the right to work
to their
here?
Family?
Don't have a work visa?
Well, if they're overstaying, they don't have a right to work.
So is that okay?
Well, for some of those people, what they will do is they will embroil themselves in the legal process. So they'll go to the AAT.
So they can drag it out.
Not with any prospect of a successful outcome, but they'll get another 2 or 3 years. they can
But
save
they're
another
taking Aussie jobs,
$15,000.
aren't they, Minister?
Well, in some cases they will be.
So you've got to do something about this.
And we are. We've got Operation Cadena. We've got, as the Secretary said, I think 0.23% of people that claim protection. But look, just to make this very important point, people who come by boat, those that came from Iran or Afghanistan or Iraq, we haven't been able to send those back as a general rule. They are the hardest cases that are still left. And so when we offer them a package to go from Manus or Nauru back to their country of origin because they've been found not to be refugees, they thumb their nose at that because they know that we can't return them. If you're coming here by plane to work in Australia, you are not coming from any of those countries. You're coming from a country where we can forcibly return you to if you're detained after you commit a crime or you overstay your visa. And you're talking about oranges and apples here, and it's a red herring.
They're different. They're different things. They
should be called out.
A couple of things finally. The ceasefire in northern Syria, I think, expires tomorrow morning our time, or that's when it's due to come to an end. I've seen reports that the British government, the French, the Germans, the Belgians have been looking at and talking to aid agencies on the ground about whether they can safely get their citizens that are in the refugee camps out. Has there been any discussion from the Australian government with these groups?
Well, I'm not going to go into the intelligence or the advice that we've received, but the clear advice to us, and I can say this much, is that it is not safe for our people to go in there. We're not sending troops in, we're not sending DFAT staff.
That's why they're talking to the agencies about getting them out to the border.
And people may be talking to agencies. The orphans that we got out, we were able to do with the assistance of agencies, but it is a very different situation.
So there would be some of those talks going on?
Not by us, but potentially by family members or others that might have an interest. We've been very clear that the circumstance there now to put anybody into that very dangerous situation, frankly, would be irresponsible. And David, again, it's a tragedy, and it upsets me that mothers or fathers would put their children into this situation. But people have left our shores consciously, in some cases with their children, or had children over there, knowing exactly wide-eyed what they were going into. And I've got advice from the agencies about certain individuals there who pose a definite national security terrorist threat if they return to our country. Do I want them back? Frankly, for a lot of them, I don't.
But the orphans?
Well, the orphans we've already been able to bring to Australia. We've provided support to them. But again, let's be realistic about kids who have been growing up in that environment for the last 5 or 6 years, who are now 12 or 13 or 14 years of age. We've seen what's happened in other parts of the world. These are tough decisions to make, and we need to look at all of the facts, but we aren't going to put our people in harm's way. And I need to make decisions for the national interest, in the national interest and in the best interests of our country. And I want to protect 10 and 12-year-old kids back here who are going to a food court or to a movie theatre or to a school, because if we've got people coming back to our country who pose a definite threat, then the threat is against those kids back here, and we need to balance that out.
Final one, you copped a bit of a blast from the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the embassy here after your comments on the Chinese Communist Party. Do you stand by?
Yes, of course I do. And I think, again, I always say to people, look, I stick to the facts. If I've said something that's factually incorrect, point it out, I'll apologise. People say, oh, well, you're not diplomatic in what you say. I'm the National Security Minister. My job is to keep Australians safe. The advice from my agencies in relation to foreign interference is definitive. It's definitive in relation to other threats that our country faces as well. Foreign interference by anybody in this country.
Is China a threat?
Well, foreign interference by a state actor or cyber activity by a state actor or a non-state actor is a threat to us. And
is that what we're talking about with China?
And we'll have a look at the individual cases as they're brought to us.
But I'm just asking you, is China a threat?
Well, I think I've answered that question. And I think the fact is...
Well, you've said with any threat by foreign actors, is China a threat?
Well, anybody who is involved in espionage in our country, anybody who is involved in the theft of intellectual property from our universities or from law firms or engineering firms who are negotiating on behalf of an Australian company trying to do business in another country.
And that's China?
And it can be in any country. Let's be real about it. So we need to call out the problems. We've done that.
Well, just to call it out, just to be clear on this, I want to be clear, you are saying that for those reasons China is a threat.
David, you asked me, do I stand by my comments the other day? Yes, I do, and I don't seek to add to them today, other than to state the obvious. Where we see a threat in our country, we'll deal with it. My job as a National Security Minister is to make sure I can do everything I can to keep Australians safe. Sometimes that means that I've got to say tough things or inconvenient things, but everything I say, I believe, is targeted toward keeping Australians safe, and I'm not going to change that.
Peter Dutton, do appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, David.